Greetings and welcome to a quick introduction to if statements in Python. Now, in programming, you occasionally need to make decisions. If this is true, then do this, else do that. An excellent example of this would be when you click on a button to quit a program and you get a confirmation dialog box that pops up that says, "Are you sure you want to quit, yes or no?" And if you click yes, the program quits. If you click no, the program, well, doesn't quit. This would be an example of something that would be handled by an if statement. There are three main keywords to an if statement. We have if, we have elif or else if, and we have else. An if-else statement will always start off with if. You must always start with asking that initial if this is true question. So you will always have one and exactly one if in an if-else-if chain. You can then have 0 to as many else-if statements as you want. There is a theoretical technical limit to the number of else-if statements you can have. It is large enough that I don't care what that number is, you will never hit it unless you are doing something very, very, very strange. And then, upon having your 0 to however many else if statements you want, you will have either 0 or 1 else statement. You can never have more than one else in a chain. Again, think about how you would say this just in plain English. If this is true, do this. Else, if this is true, do that. Else, do this other thing. I need some eggs. If grocery store is open, then go to grocery store. Else, if gas station is open, go to gas station. Else, go to neighbor. I wouldn't continue to say, else, go to farm. I would say, else, if neighbor is home, go to neighbor. Else, go to farm. That else is always the conclusion of the statement if it's there. Or maybe I'm just not that committed to getting eggs right now. I could just simply say if grocery store equals open, then go to store. And end it there. It's like it's not that important to get eggs. I'm not going to go to the gas station or harass my neighbor for eggs. I just wanted a fried egg sandwich. It's not that important. And that's kind of what we're doing with here in programming. I can have just an if. I can have an if else. Or I can have an if else chain. The next part of an if statement in Python is a conditional, or the if and the else if. This is something that can evaluate to be true or false. In this particular case, where I've got it highlighted, the true falseness of it is the variable customer age less than 10? In other words, is it a value that is less than 10 non-exclusive? So like 9, 8, 7, so on and so forth. If customer age is 10, this would evaluate to be false because 10 is not less than 10. And then for this else if, I am checking to see if the customer age is greater than or equal to 55. So 55 is a valid number for this to evaluate to be true. And then down here, I'm checking to see if drink yes no is equal to the string y, capital Y specifically. Talk more about that in a moment. The final part for an if line, for that initial line, is a colon. Python, for the most part, does not have mandatory end characters or mandatory delimiters for the end of a line. If statements and looping statements are one of the few exceptions to this rule. all parts, all lines of an if statement must end with a colon. So if conditional colon, else if conditional colon, else colon. You must always have that colon. If you forget to put it in, you will get a red squiggle of doom, and if you mouse over it, you will be told that it's expecting to see a colon character there. Next, we have the lines that are associated with that if statement. What are the things that I want to do? What are the lines of code that I want to execute if this condition has been found to be true? And how we tell Python this is by indentation. So since line 9 is indented, that tells Python that it belongs to the if statement on line 8. Line 11 belongs to line 10 because of its indentation. Line 13 belongs to line 12 because of its indentation. Lines 20 through 24 all belong to line 19. All of these are associated with the if statement on line 19. If that if statement is not true, lines 20 through 24 will never be executed. They won't even be looked at. And you can nest them. So I ask the question, do they want a drink? And if that is yes, then I ask the question, should it be small or large? So you can have if statements nested. Again, this can go as many levels deep as you want. There is a theoretical limit. You are not going to reach it. So let's take a look at this program specifically to see what it is doing. For line 2, we're just simply printing out welcome to the menu ordering system, letting the user know, hey, the program's starting, this is a menu ordering system. Then we're going to prompt the user, what is the age of the customer? So we're going to use input, the input function, to get a string from the user. Remember, input is going to give us a string, but I want a number. So I'm going to take input, I'm going to cast it to an int, and then I'm going to store that value into customer age. Line 6, strictly technically speaking, is optional. You really should have it. You should always initialize a variable before you try and use it because of something called scope. In other languages, if I was to comment out line 6, in a great many other languages, this code would no longer work because price would be defined inside of these else, if else statements here, but would not be defined here. This is not true for Python, but Python does have scope. We'll talk more about it when we get to functions, but it is still best practice to initialize a variable outside of if statements and looping statements if you want to use it outside of the if statements and looping statements. Next, I'm going to ask the question, is customer age less than 10? If that is true, then I will set the price to 8. For these chains, you only ever execute 1. As soon as 1 is true, you skip over the others. So if customer age is 9, I will execute line 9, and then execution will skip down to line 14. If the customer's age is 56, this is false, so it doesn't execute. We come down to line 10. Oh, 56 is greater than or equal to 55, so I'll execute line 11, skip down to line 14. And if the age is not less than 10 or greater than or equal to 55, then like say 15, this will be false. This will be false. An else statement will always execute. An else statement is always true. It will always execute, which is why it must be the last one in these chains. And so 15, line 8 is false, line 10 is false, therefore we will execute line 13 and set the price to 12. We'll then display the current price, so that way we know we've entered things in correctly. Then we're going to prompt the user, do you want a drink? Yes or no. We will deal with input validation later. For the moment, we are going to continue with our expectation, our highly dangerous expectation, that the user will give us the correct input. Then we'll ask the question, do they want to drink? Notice I'm only checking for the yes condition here. I am not bothering to check for no, because if the answer is no, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm just checking. If drink yes no is equal to a capital Y, then I'm going to do something. Otherwise, I don't care. And then nested inside that if statement, I'm going to ask some more questions. Do you want a small or a large? And if they entered in an L, that means they want a large. I'll add 2 to the price. And again, I'm not checking explicitly for the S here because what are the two options, right? It's either going to be a small or a large. It's not a large, so it's got to be a small. So I'm just going to add 1 to the price. And then, of course, our final line here, where we're printing out the total. Again, as a reminder, in Python specifically, anytime you see this F in front of a string, and it doesn't have to be inside a print statement, this F can be used anywhere a string is used, then that means if you have curly brackets inside your string, the text within the curly brackets will be interpreted as the value of that variable. So that is what we are doing here with price. I want to actually display what that value is. So let's see and make sure that this works. I'm going to hit Control F5 because I don't particularly need to debug right now. Remember to click down into the terminal. Otherwise, if you just type, you'll be typing up here in your source code, which you don't want. So click down in the terminal. There's the age of the customer. Customer is 5. Do I want a drink? Yes. I want a large drink. Total is $10. Checks out. 5, price is 8. Large drinks, $2. Total is 10. Let's run it again. I'll hit F5. Again, make sure that you still are in the terminal, that you have a solid white block down here. I'll check senior and no drink this time. So 66, no, I don't want to drink. Total is 9, as expected. One last thing, just sort of to drive home the point on how sensitive these if statements can be. Hit F5 again. 15, do I want to drink? Yes, only this time I'm going to put in a lowercase y. It's not going to work because it's case sensitive. Like I said, we will look more at string formatting later and input validation later. Just keep in mind that if you have gone through and typed in this code yourself to follow along and your drink ordering system isn't working, 1, make sure that you are checking for a capital Y in your if statement. And then 2, make sure that you are putting a capital Y into the terminal when it prompts you for input. Same thing for small or large. Make sure that you are checking for a capital L and that you are inputting a capital L. One last thing before we move off of this code example. There are a couple of other ways that we can do this. Almost always in programming, there are multiple paths to the same solution that are equally valid. For example, instead of initializing the price to 0, I could initialize the price to 12 and then not have that else statement. So now I'm setting the price to 12, but if the customer's age is less than 10, I'll overwrite it to 8. And if the customer's age is greater than or equal to 55, I'll overwrite it to 9. Same exact result, just slightly different logic. Same thing down here. with the drink yes/no questions. Instead of checking for did the user input a large, I could check to see did the user input for a small. So I could change this to an S, change this to a plus equals 1, change this one to a plus equals 2. I have not changed the output of the program. It's still going to work. It's still going to give me the correct answer. So I will be 24, and I will want a drink, and I will want a small. $13, that is the correct total. Always remember that when it comes to programming, there are almost always multiple paths to the same answer. Well, that is it for if statements. Remember, if you want additional coverage of if statements or you just prefer for reading over video formatting, W3 Schools has an excellent overview of if statements. And I will talk to you in the next video.